night.
What up, guys? Bobo here with BrassReel Brothers. Thanks for coming back to support Popcoins. Oh, we got a special treat for you tonight. Got my broski Andrew here.
Yo!
And we got, if you can't tell, the monitors right here behind us.
Top 10 vampire movies!
Oh, shit! Now, look, we're doing Andrew's top 10, and we're doing my top 10. They could match up, and if they do, awesome. We'll show you how that all works while we're doing it. But starting off, though, you know, vampires, zombies, there's all these different parts of horror movies, of different types of monsters that literally have their own genre. I mean, the amount of vampire movies that are out there, we were just talking about this. We had to like look at lists of them to make sure we weren't forgetting ones just because there's so many.
Yeah, and this is a list that is not critically acclaimed. Some people might say that the Nosferatu, which is 100 years old now, should be the top number one. But this is nostalgia reasons, just what we had the most fun watching.
How it affected you the most, why it's important to you, why it's your favorite. And for me, vampire movies, you know, they're all across the board. There's so many different styles of them. I honestly think that when you're a kid, one of the first things you kind of are aware of is like a movie monster or a Halloween monster is like vampires, like the Hall.
Yeah.
You know, the whole teeth thing. I just remember that just as much as I remember the first scary image on TV.
That's right.
Vampires. So I thought we should talk about them.
Yeah. They have their own lore, which some films attribute to, and some films kind of do away with and do some different nuances to. And that's what we're going to talk about. Without further ado,
we're going to do it. Andrew, let's name it off. Starting off with number 10.
All right. My number 10 is Underworld.
Oh, that's my number 9 as well. So, the sexy Kate Beckinsale.
Oh,
and she's a good actor too.
And
I'm not
she
gonna take
still
that.
looks good.
God, she looks the same age.
And I guess you could say that maybe this is a werewolf movie as well, but I think that the focus is really on the vampires and the vampire legacies that are within this film. So, I mean, for me, it was just a really cool mix with the vampire and the werewolves battle, which I had never really not seen before. The gothic look of it was something I just always remembered.
It was all cold blue and everything.
Yeah.
Stunts too. That was another thing.
Oh,
there was
yeah.
lots of cool action and stunts. Instead of it just being gothic horror, it was actually a gothic horror action movie.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing really scary about it, but it was still a vampire movie, and it was still about vampires living amongst us and werewolves living amongst us, and the whole idea of this bloodline and what's his name getting turned into a half vampire,
Scott Speedman.
Yeah, Scott Speedman getting turned into half vampire, half werewolf. That was pretty epic, and when he finally, let it all out at the end, I mean, it was pretty badass.
And honestly, those werewolves are like the movie's not necessarily a scary horror movie, like it jumps out and you're not like, oh, but the werewolves were scary. I mean, when they became werewolves, they're all just.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought
that was pretty good.
Pretty dope.
When you see the head vampire being brought back to life from his grave. Or awakened, I guess you should say. And he just kind of grabs that huge ass werewolf by the throat and just kind of stares at him and throws him. It's like, oh!
Yeah. No, it was, again, awesome, like almost like a kung fu / choreography vampire werewolf gothic horror. It was, like he said, not scary. It was more about the premise, the underworld, if you will. What goes on with this secret battle that us humans aren't aware that's been going on for thousands of years.
Right. They were pretty good at making sure that the humans were really not aware of any of this. Hence why Scott Speedman's character is very much thrown into this whole thing like, what?
Yeah, it's very much a surprise to him. So, look, I think it's a fitting place for you as your number 10. Like I said, for me, it hit right at my number 9. So right in the same area. So, hey, Underworld, badass movie. I love it. Recommend it. My number 10 is the classic Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Oh, yeah.
I fought so hard about where to put this on my list, and it's not on there.
With the great Christy Swanson. Her name's Christy Swanson, actually, but I like to say Swanson. It just sounds sort of sexy for some
yeah.
reason. But her and Luke Perry, of all greatness.
Oh, man.
And how about Paul Rubens?
That's right.
Remember?
As the goofy vampire.
Yeah, so, look, to me, that was the first time, as when I was younger, that I saw that you could have fun in the horror genre. It really tiptoed right on the fine line to where it was still sort of like, oh, man, vampires. And to me, I just thought it was really, really clever and funny, and I think it sort of paved the way for a lot of other sort of pop culture vibes of vampire type stuff.
And you know who else was featured for maybe a 5-second clip in that film? Ben Affleck.
No, I don't remember that. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
He was a basketball player who sees the vampire on the basketball court, and he kind of just and gives him the basketball.
Oh man, he was the bomb in Phantom, so I bet you he was the bomb in that. If you think about it, it was sort of a little bit of What We Do in the Shadows before What We Do in the Shadows. Obviously, What We Do in the Shadows is a lot sillier. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer has some slapsticky moments in it, you know. It was definitely not like the show, whereas the show, it was a little bit more of a badass type deal.
It's funny you say that because the show got pitched as what the Buffy movie was supposed to be.
Right. That was the intention of the Buffy movie. I sort of liked what the Buffy movie turned out to be instead of what the original idea was. I'm not the biggest fan of the show, personally. I really do enjoy the movie, but I think a lot of it has to do with how old I was when it came out. It was sort of the hip, hot, trendy thing at the time. And sort of like Bill and Ted's, it just kind of made that sort of mark on my life.
Let me just stop you right there. You didn't like the show? Sarah Michelle Gellar as Buffy?
I don't think that she was bad casting or anything. It just wasn't I just never got into it. It just was, I don't know.
Oh, man.
It came on after Smallville. And
that show, man.
I'm not saying it was bad, and it definitely had its following. Obviously, it was successful, but yeah, it just was never my thing.
All right.
But yeah, there's my number 10, Buffy. So
my number 9 is Dracula Untold, and it's not that old of a movie. It's 2014. In fact, the guy that directed it has really not even done much since. I just really dug the story of this. It's medieval times, and it does use Vlad the Impaler, who is Dracula from Bram Stoker, but he becomes Dracula because he wants to protect his kingdom. The only way for him to protect his kingdom, he meets a vampire on accident, gives him a taste of his blood, and he's able to defeat all the Turkish king who's trying to take over Transylvania and turn all of his Transylvanian kids, his Transylvania kids into slaves or into soldiers. He was trying to protect his kingdom and his family. So anyways, just the whole thing was really cool to me. That it was a good guy. He became a vampire to protect his family and save his kingdom. And he ends up letting everybody he turned into a vampire, he ends up letting them perish in the sun, even himself. But magically, because somebody finds blood from a cup, pours it into, he ends up, getting brought back to life centuries later, and then meets Mina, who looks like his wife from centuries ago. So the whole thing just was really cool to me, and I dug that story.
And remember, we said these were our favorite vampire movies, not horror necessarily. Same thing with this Dracula Untold. I think it was taking more of that sort of great story approach. Let's really get ourselves attached to these characters, and not necessarily let's not focus on the horror element of a Dracula, because the horror element's there. He's getting cursed to become Dracula. That's horrific. That's the situation that's horrific about it. But I do like how it's much more it feels more like a period piece than it does a horror movie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
For sure.
And I like that about it.
I just like the twist that story had.
No, I agree with you. It's a great movie. I didn't put it on here just because there's some on here that I like better for myself. So my number 8, Blade. The original Blade. With Wesley Snipes. Now, I know that sounds like it's low on the list, but you'll see why a little later.
That's my number 8.
Oh, it's number 8?
That's my number 8.
Look, that's why we're film partners, baby girls. That is definitely why we're film partners. Did you see Blade in the theater?
Oh, hell yeah.
I did too. I was in high school, and I remember everybody was talking about the sunglasses scene. Remember when he grabs the sunglasses and puts them back on? We hadn't seen a vampire movie to where you wanted to root for a vampire killer who was a vampire.
Yeah. It had never been done before.
No, and obviously, if you were a fan of the comics, you understood who Blade was. But even then, if you weren't a really deep reader of the comics and you were just somebody who liked to read Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, you might not have known that Blade was a comic book character. Now, like I said, if you were a hardcore reader like myself, you knew that he was a comic book character. So when that movie was coming out, first off, I couldn't believe that that's the one that they were making. Out of all the comic book characters out there, they chose to do Blade. But clearly, when you start watching the movie, the last thing that movie is a comic book film. You know what I mean?
Like, oh no, well, not how we see them now.
Right, but even then, like if you watch the third Blade, it seems a little bit more like a comic book film that's horror and vampire, whereas the first movie is definitely like this sort of techno noir horror infused with sort of this like seductive thing going on. But then again, there's a little bit of this underworld vibe to it in the sense that there's this whole secret world of vampires running around just living amongst everybody with their own battles happening and their own hierarchies. But you got the Daywalker, Wesley Snipes out there.
That's right.
And just the way he's a badass martial artist as this vampire hunter, and he's got the fangs the whole time he's doing it. And he's throwing like silver blades at everybody, and silver kills him in this movie. Which that's something that I liked at first, because at first I was like, "How is this dude going to kill all these vampires with these guns?" And then that's like, "Oh, in this lore, silver hurts him, so he can just go in there and I don't know, man. It just I remember just being so happy when I was watching that movie in the theater, being like, I love that we're getting this.
Because Underworld, I put 10 because I saw Blade first. And Blade just had something that we'd never seen before.
I feel like there's more to Blade.
Yeah, I mean, it was just I just thought it was cool at the time, and I mean, for me, it's on my list. That's all I can say.
Yeah, and look, let's not forget we've got Chris Christopherson as Whistle in there, which is badass. Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost. I mean, the whole casting of everything is just beautiful. The soundtrack at the time was all super techno. It put a movie out there that people weren't aware that they liked this type of movie. People are like, ugh, vampire movies. It's like, no, let me show you Blade. You know, and it's like, oh shit, this is all right. This is a good vampire movie. Blade, badass film.
All right, my number 7 is a little movie called Dracula 2000, which Craven produced, and it is starring Gerard Butler as Dracula.
Is that how he says it in the movie?
No.
Classic.
But it does have an accent. In fact, there's a moment. There's a scene where somebody's asking him, "Would you like some coffee?" And he says, "I don't drink coffee."
Oh, classic. Yeah, instead of "I don't drink wine."
Yeah, but for me, what I remembered about this and what I liked about this movie, this always stuck with me because I liked the story of this one too. First of all, I liked that they used the classic names Lucy and Mina, so that always was like, oh yeah, they're going right into the Bram Stoker's novel, the classic character names. But the really, really cool twist at the end is when Lucy, she gets a little taste of his blood, and she gets the fangs, but it doesn't turn her because she doesn't get bitten. It's the whole a taste of his blood, and she touches him, and she's able to see who he really is. And who he really is revealed to be Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed Jesus and hung himself. But in this movie, while he's hanging there trying to kill himself, he makes a deal with the devil and it turns him into Dracula. I thought that was cool and a really just interesting way to tell a story about Dracula and how he's been around since, for 3,000 years. I was like, that's cool. And it just always stuck with me, and I liked it.
Yeah, a cool revisionist approach on the character you already know. And let's face it, at this point with Dracula, it's kind of become that character that's been around in fiction for so long that you have to retell it. And you have to see someone else's new approach towards it because it's not necessarily a specific story. It's just we know that there's this guy that's cursed with this legacy of being a vampire. Mm-hmm. But certain people show it in certain ways, like the Gerard Butler one, they show it that way. The movie we saw, The Invitation, they show it in a different way than that.
Yeah. Even the iconic way that he dies in the end of this is a stake through his heart with a rope around his neck, and he's being hung by a cross. I mean, I was like, and they got the classic wives as well, because he bites these 3 girls. They start trying to attack Lucy. I mean, I just dug it.
That's cool when they do that. I honestly, I've never seen it, and now I want to watch it because of the way you've talked about it the past few times we hung out, because we've been talking about doing this video. The only reason I never actually watched it is because of the title. Dracula 2000. It just...
You're not wrong. I mean, the title alone is like, I'm not gonna watch that.
That's for real.
But I did.
It made me not give it any. It made me not pay attention to it at all. Like, I didn't know it was about what it was about until he told me. I was like, oh, that sounds good. I didn't know it had Gerard Butler in it. I just saw Dracula 2000. I was like, oh, shit.
That was Gerard Butler pre 300 and pre the Dragon movie he did with Matthew McConaughey.
Reign of Fire.
Yeah, Reign of Fire.
Great movie, by the way.
Yeah, oh for sure. Yeah.
All right, so we're going for my number 7 now. So my number 7 is going to be 2 movies combined, and you'll see why. It's because one is the foreign version and one is the American version. And this is one of very few movies that I've seen where I can't decide which one I like better, because they literally did the American version, I feel like, just as good as the foreign version. It's just for an American market to be able to watch it without having to read subtitles. Now, obviously, it's different actors and stuff like that, but Let the Right One In and Let Me In, both of those movies, definitely is amongst the most original vampire movie I've seen, in the sense of what you're really feeling while you're watching it, because this old vampire girl wants to be with somebody, kind of. She finds this boy who she starts to develop sort of a relationship and feelings, and obviously she's the vampire she has to feed. She has to keep staying alive, but she doesn't want to this boy, and then she doesn't want to disclose to this boy really what's going on. But then there's the whole thing about having to letting a vampire into your house. You have to invite them in, and anyways, it very rarely really focuses on the horror aspects of it. But when it does, good God, it's scary. It gets you. And visually, it's like, oh, damn. The depiction of vampires, and especially, when you get turned as a vampire, you stay that age you're turned. So this is a little kid who's never been able to experience anything outside of life except being a little kid. Nobody's treated her any other way except for being a kid, until she kills people, But, so I just think that one was really original, and I do think both of them are great.
Man, I don't have a comment because I never watched them, and I feel like an awful vampire movie fan. But what can I say?
They kind of slipped under the radar for a lot of people, and they didn't market it hugely. Even the American one, like the only reason I knew about the American one is because I liked the foreign one. But hey, some of these I might not have seen. Like we said, I didn't see Dracula 2000. So we'll go now for your number 6,
and that is From Dusk Till Dawn.
Woo! Intersection here. That's my number 4.
Ooh!
Now, since it's your number 6 and you went first, what is it about this movie? Where'd you see it? When'd you see it?
I gotta be honest, I don't remember when I saw it. I mean, I've drank a lot of beer since then. But I do just know that it holds a special place in my heart, because it was the first Robert Rodriguez movie I saw. Oh, and Salma Hayek. I mean, you can't talk about this movie without talking about the snake around her neck. I mean, what she was wearing, how she was dancing.
Booty shot, what?
Yeah.
One of the most seductive scenes in any movie, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And she doesn't even get naked, and it's still one of the most seductive scenes ever.
I don't know, man. It was just a cool underground, gritty vampire western. I liked the plot. The very beginning, you would have no idea this is going to end up being a vampire movie with Quentin Tarantino, who's actually great as that
phenomenal
as that brother to George Clooney. Yeah. And the young Juliette Lewis. The young Juliette Lewis, I really enjoyed the dynamic of these characters. George Clooney being this hard-ass criminal who is threatening to kill Juliette Lewis's father, which is Harvey Keitel. The entire time, if they went out of line, because he was hijacking them.
And lots of tense scenes on that camper when they're driving on the road. Lots of really tense scenes.
So the dynamic of those types of people coming together for survival because of where they end up, that was just really cool, and the only people that survive are Juliette Lewis and George Clooney. When they walk out of that place at sunrise, she's just like, I'm going where you're going.
She's like, screw it. Yeah, let's do this.
Like, my family is dead.
Her
brother's dead. She's like, you're a criminal, but I'm not. But
Let's do this.
I'm going where you're going. And the vampires, when they finally came out, because the whole thing is being run by people who are in fact vampires, and they're getting bikers and motorists in after hours, and then what ends up happening is they all prey on them. These people happen to get out of there and kill all of them.
Yeah, that movie was badass, and it's great because a lot of people think it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, and it's actually a Robert Rodriguez movie, screenplay by Quentin Tarantino, story by Robert Kurtzman, but Quentin did all the dialogue and everything and juiced it up a lot. But then Robert Rodriguez was talking to him and basically is like, look, you got to be Richie.
Yeah.
He's like, I just see you as Richie. And apparently it took him a little bit of convincing to finally be like, all right, I'll do it. And to me, the movie wouldn't be as good if he wasn't Richie.
Yeah.
And
Tarantino wasn't a rookie to acting. He'd been in Reservoir Dogs already at this time.
Yeah, and he had done other stuff too. Like I think there's this one movie that's something talk radio that he was like in for a second. He knew the industry at this point.
But it's still before Tarantino is who he is now.
Oh, yeah. No, I think the only thing that had existed at this point was Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and I don't think Jackie Brown had come out yet.
No.
Maybe Four Rooms existed. I can't remember on that. But, yeah, Dusk Till Dawn, the gear shift that it does in the middle. When I say becoming, like, snap of a finger becoming a vampire movie, it's like you're watching her dance, she's doing her thing, and then all of a sudden...
Bam! Fangs come out like...
And then everybody starts transforming, and it's the greatest bar fight of all time because it's a vampire bar fight, and it gets ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, they're playing guitars on dead bodies. I mean, it's beautiful.
And the great Danny Trejo.
Yeah. Oh, Cheech Marin's all. Oh, dude. And I'm not even going to repeat what he was saying, but if you know Cheech Marin in Dusk Till Dawn, you know the part I'm talking about where he's outside yelling. But Tom Savini, the great Tom Savini, who does, is the special effects god, the king of special effects. Greg Nicotero and Tom Savini's team at the time, they did all the special effects makeup, but he plays Sex Machine, the guy that has the pistol that comes up in the balls.
Yes.
I mean, that's awesome too. Just the fact that Robert Rodriguez has Tom Savini doing that stuff in there, just beautiful stuff. So it's got Robert Rodriguez all over it. It's got Quentin's appeal all over it. I mean, it's just the greatest hybrid that those two have ever done, and it's actually surprising and upsetting that they haven't done another collaboration like that, to where Quentin writes something and Rodriguez directs it.
Ain't that the truth?
Now that they've done stuff together, like Quentin co-directed some stuff on Sin City and things like that, and they're still homeboys. I mean, they did the Grindhouse movies, but I would really like them.
I want to see him just do another vampire movie, just a whole new story. Do it.
Yeah, I think Quentin, you can do whatever you want. I want to see you do whatever. And Rodriguez. I'm going to go with my number 6, and this one is going to be one that a lot of people aren't aware of. A little movie directed by Catherine Bigelow called Near Dark, starring Lance Hendrickson and Bill Paxton. A few other people that I can't remember right off the top of my head, but those are the ones that stand out. Have you seen this one?
Long time ago, yeah.
It's very much kind of a, if you know how like Blade Runner, even though it's a futuristic movie and it's sci-fi, but there are moments where they're like inside buildings and stuff in Blade Runner. It's just real gritty and dark and smoky air and just things look dirty, and that's how like this whole movie is. And just every place they go, and the premise is this like young group of vampires. They're roaming the United States basically, and they're kind of like the last living vampires that are around. And they just do some really cool stuff because they have this huge camper that they drive around in, and they just go from place to place and feeding. And there's a story that gets wrapped up in them. They actually get a couple of humans involved, take them hostage. It's just got this original storyline to it that's kind of like The Hitcher meets like a little bit of a Western feel.
Yeah.
But then it's also about these vampires. Like, it's not that the vampire part is secondary, it's just, it doesn't feel like a vampire movie necessarily at its core. The vampires they just happen to be vampires along this quest that they're dealing with. But I really enjoy that movie. I think it's just under the radar. From what I understand, it didn't do super well in the beginning when it came out, but over time it's become a huge cult classic for people that, like me, that like just sifting through all kinds of smut. But that one's not smut. That's a really quality film, and that one's got more layers. There's emotional moments. There's some scenes where people are burning out in the sun and stuff and sacrificing themselves, and so I really like that movie.
Well, that's funny that you're mentioning that, because it actually kind of reminds me of a movie that I contemplated putting on here called The Forsaken. It had Jonathan Scaich and Simon Rex and that really cute blonde girl who was in Coyote Ugly. And she was like, she fell prey to them. But the whole thing of that movie took place in a car. Like they were always in a car. They were never in a house. And so it just that
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if it was somebody
like inspired by it.
or if they're like, "Hey, let's revisit this movie, repackage it, and redo it." Because a lot of times they do that with movies.
Yeah.
You know, let's repackage this, resell it, rewrite it, introduce it in a new light. I've never seen that one actually, so I remember it. I know exactly. I can visualize the cover.
Yeah.
But I just never watched it for some reason. I like doing these lists like this because this is going to make me get into watching these for sure.
All right, man.
All the ones that I haven't seen.